I love the suggestion that Kathy made last time and understanding the pushback from streets and operations. But then also that in the core area, there's a separate funding source. Do we feel that there's any more work that needs to be done on that front, or perhaps that comes down the line, but
my recommendation is let the design play out. I don't see major conflicts. It's just if you all of a sudden you start creating a lot of bulb outs and, you know, special conditions and just thinking about how plows run down roads and things like that. But what we're dealing with, I don't necessarily see a big conflict, but that's just part of the natural design process that we go through. It's like, are we designing something that can be maintained?
Sure.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Right. And to get ahead of it, staff can let it, you know, the city council know that how we voted, that but prior to the letter come out, they know that there's support of that if CFAC does get stayed. So if.
Can I ask a question, Russ? Is there a mechanism for funding within the core area to move to streets?
I don't think TIF funding can be used for maintenance. Do you know?
It can't be used for maintenance.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was 95% sure of that. And Allie gave me the other 5. It's just for capital.
Gotcha.
All right, Allie.
Yeah, so the next kind of big topic for everyone. Find my screen again. There we go. So council, we have a new council that's, well, not entirely new, but some new council members that are joining council starting the 1st January meeting. And they'll be entering into kind of a process to establish new council goals. And so as part of that, they'll be hosting some listening sessions, and they do invite advisory board members to participate in that. The listening session is scheduled for January 19th, the morning before your next meeting. So we kind of need to have a discussion at this meeting in order to kind of collect the feedback from the group about what you'd like to kind of advocate to council as your priorities for their council goal setting. And so kind of as part of that, I think as we're wrapping up our 1st year of work as CAB, and like, thank you all for all of your time again. Wanted to kind of just bring back the initial work plan that you all approved kind of at your 1st meeting in January of 2022. And kind of talk about what we've completed, and we're kind of in process of completing a few more of those work plan priorities, and sort of ask the question of what are new priorities that you all want to identify for the next 1 to 2 years, so that we can incorporate those into council goals in our budgeting as needed. So initially, you know, you kind of set these initial priorities at the top of the screen. I think we've all kind of developed an understanding of TIF and kind of the historic work that's been completed up to date. We just had Borough adopt the CIP, so we've kind of identified our funding priorities. Later today, we'll talk a little bit more about the performance metrics, but I think we'll be in a good place to kind of have those finalized in the next several months, as well as some of the private development, redevelopment partnership program. So, you know, 4 of your tasks will kind of be completed within the next 3 to 4 months. We've also kind of completed the core area equity work. So we're finalizing that final report, and I did ask folks that didn't attend the subcommittee meeting. We did kind of give a presentation at one of those subcommittee meetings on that effort, and there are some slides posted to the CAB webpage for you all to look at, but that work is kind of coming to, not that it's ending completely, there's work to kind of follow up on, but we kind of did some of that outreach and have some final recommendations from that. And then, you know, you continue to be a sounding board for projects in the core area, and we expect that to kind of be an ongoing goal of yours. But are there kind of any new priorities that you all would like to see in your work plan for the next 1 to 2 years? And so I kind of identified some things that I've heard from you all. So one of those was really looking at some of our infrastructure requirements, particularly on priority core area streets. We've talked about kind of the sidewalk in lieu of fee or something along those lines. So that would be kind of a project for us to look at some of our code requirements for developments that are, you know, especially our minimum development standard review requirements for kind of adaptive reuse projects in the district. Are there ways that we can make some of those projects a little bit more feasible? We can't waive ADA accessibility requirements when a building gets occupancy, but we could look at options, especially on streets where we think we're going to redesign that street with TIF dollars later, maybe doing an in lieu of fee instead. So that would be a whole project. It would take kind of coordination with multiple city departments, but that could be something that we work on in the next year or two.
Prior to doing this, where does the city stand on that topic now? I know that there was some
It's,
potential meetings about that, but
well, we have some current projects that we're discussing and it's difficult, I guess, because when you look at the way the code is written, it basically says you got to build your frontage, right? And MDS has the requirements of sidewalks and things like that. So from a staff perspective, it becomes a difficult conversation, but just think of the proposed development at Second and Hawthorne, right? You go, okay, so now we have a TIF project on Second that was identified in the CIP. It's going into design. Are we requiring them to build that frontage or not? And if we do, what are they building to? If not, are they doing a payment in lieu, or do we want to have policies of if it's in the TIF CIP and we can let me give you an example. Outside of a TIF district, a lot of times we will have projects in the CIP. Take the bond, the long list of geo bond projects. We can't let a development rely on that project list until we have a construction contract approved by council. Even though it's listed on the bond and maybe in the 5-year CIP, things move around. And so we don't rely and say, yep, you're guaranteed to see that frontage improvement until council approves that contract and we have a schedule. In the core, we could have conversations, again, Second and Hawthorne, of saying, well, we know that we've got a defined project that is basically funded by TIF dollars on Second Street. Do we still want to have a financial, do we want them to build it, pay in lieu, or just say, no, you don't need to do anything about it because we are relying on TIF to do that? Then you can go to Hawthorne, which is a different conversation, right? It's in the TIF district, it's not on a CIP, but we're also pursuing money on the Hawthorne Bridge. And so it doesn't make sense to build anything to rebuild that frontage to that because we're not quite sure what it's going to be because we're not sure where the landing of Hawthorne is going to be. So in that case, do we want them to build some of the improvements and pay in lieu on the others? Do we want them to financial guarantee it? Do we want to just say, no, it's going to be backed by TIF? And, you're kind of, because if we say no to this development, then someone's going to have to come in and fill in the gap. Right, because we're not going to go back to them. So we have tools in the toolbox for standard development practices where we can use a bond to secure improvements. But if you want to get development moving, if you have a bond on a project and you're saying, well, we're waiting to see if this shows up on the CIP, they have to put that in their pro forma typically to say, well, if it doesn't happen, they're going to pull my bond and I got to go build it. So how much do you want to help incentivize things and what kind of policy questions go into that? And as Ali said, so it's quite a long project. And then you can take it down to the next level of what are we doing with, kind of just trying to get existing sites moving with MDS requirements. Do we want them to build a sidewalk or not? Do we want stuff built in certain areas versus not other areas? Because every lot has a different story and every street has a different story.
Councilor Campbell also has her hand raised.
go to Councilor Campbell. I think hers is probably up for.
Thank you. It's a little bit different question for Russ or Allison. What's the sewer situation there in the central district, please?
It's fantastic, Barb. No, there is capacity. At some point, we're going to have to, we've got a central interceptor that needs to come through, not in anytime in the near future. That'll be evaluated. Like when we do Second Street, we'll be looking at, is there synergy? Is there galvanized lines that we need to replace while we're there? Do we need to do something with the sewer system? Where we might have some deficiencies is more on the water side than.
Water is going to contribute to the Second Street project.
Yeah, but I'm just in terms of like existing deficiencies. I don't know if we have old galvanized lines in that area or undersized lines. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm assuming we do in that part. So those are the kind of the questions of do we want to replace those? Or if a development comes in and they're going to build the frontage, do we say, well, what are we doing with the water line at that point? Or is it better to have the corridor? Right. So these are all the questions that we're in constant discussions and we on good firm answers, except what's in the development code, which I'm not sure is in direct. I guess the question is that in direct alignment with what CAB and council and in this particular area?
Thank you.
Rather can show that Lisa Heim has joined us.
Here, present. What's the connection? Sorry, you had a question first.
I would love to add this to our work plan. I think it's super important. In my experience, the development code going lot by lot isn't the best method for building out infrastructure. And if we have a body dedicated to looking at a specific area and identifying pedestrian corridors that are priority, other areas that we can maybe let go, having an in lieu of fee and a clear direction of where those monies should and could go makes a ton of sense to me, not just for the core, but for the entire city. And I know that's a huge project, but it is, I think, a better way to develop a city. And if we can start that work in the core and make decisions on where we'd like to prioritize that and how that makes sense with everything that's going on, to me, that makes a lot of sense. That's worth doing, that will serve all the developments that happen in the area. So I would love to try, and I know that's a big, and even if it got codified into the development code, where it's like, hey, look, you can build out your frontage or the in lieu of fee, if you're in a neighborhood or district or whatever that has some sort of a pedestrian sidewalk master plan. To me, that would be great progress. I see a lot of issues with just trying to do lot by lot and not necessarily seeing that serve the greater public, and often being a big financial burden to the developer with no benefit to the public, you know.
Yeah, and I've told Ally this from this is my personal perspective of kind of where I think we are in the time continuum of the core area. There's a lot of great policy work that's been done by this board and by council to set the table. And, you know, we've got CIP, we've got direction on what we're building now. We've got the MUPD in place. Allison's done a great job of getting that program moving. So now we're really into how do we get buildings out of the ground? And that's, from my perspective, that's where we're really focused now. Is I don't know how much code, like high level code changes we need to do at this point. We need to let the market respond to us, but we know of getting buildings out of the ground, this is probably the number one topic that we're wrestling with, and we don't have clarity on how to proceed and make sure that we're in alignment with what CAB and council and borough want to do in that area.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think that was my comment, is sort of like, what are the biggest barriers, right? Like, and what do we need? What else can we start to tackle and try and get out of the way so that we actually start to see these buildings come out of the ground? So that, and maybe this is it, but it would be interesting. Like, I shared that memo of the builders roundtable, right? This wasn't actually one that came up specifically and like what I heard from that group, and that's just a small subset, right? But like, there's kind of some things in there about like things we could be looking at, other barriers to remove, right, to really help these projects go. So I guess that would be my kind of question. I'm open to having an element in our work plan that is very much about like, let's ID the biggest barriers that remain and then figure out what makes sense and what is something that we could tackle. I like that frame, and I think that's a good place for us to be. So if it is this, then I'm open to that. But I think it would be good to sort of ground truth that it's like, that's the city's perspective. And I would also like to hear from like builders and developers, right, of like what it continues to stand in your way of moving forward with the project, right? And if in fact it is this, that's great. But I would like to kind of ground it with kind of a variety of like stakeholder input, I guess.
Kathy Austin has her hand up online.
Yeah, I just want to second what Corey said, and she said it in an excellent way. I think if we frame this as identifying issues that are preventing projects from going forward, you know, what are the barriers? I think this one will be a significant barrier. If it didn't come up already, it will. But I think that now that we've done so much, I think it's appropriate for us to slot in that we're going to try to solicit information, get actual data if we can, and identify what the problems are, and then prioritize how we can address those problems.
Dale?
Yeah, I think the sidewalk, the infrastructure requirements it's really kind of a scale issue. You know, if you have 100 feet of frontage or 200 feet of frontage or whatever, it's not quite the same deal as if you have a small parcel. So, and I know we're all thinking of open space event studio because we went there on our tour and we heard about the problem they were having that was really preventing it from going forward. And we're all very sympathetic to that. It may require some sort of a code change to allow it in the central district, but could it be tied into our partnership program where basically we commit through that yes, we will build the sidewalk, and where you know, the urban renewal district says that, then it can be exempted.
That, yeah, and
Something like that.
that's what and that's why we think this is a good board. If they want to have this discussion, it's good to come here because what are we backstopping off of the TIF? And a lot of times, you know, you could get just one of those projects that comes in and they just want to do something. That project could be out there for 5, 10, 15, 20 years before it gets kind of completely redeveloped, because we see that all over town. So just, again, trying to weigh all the different options. And do we want to look at what do we want to do at the first set of projects that come out? Is that one set of kind of discussions we want to have? And then once we get rolling, does it want to change and morph over time? Because it can. And that really relays into how we're using TIF dollars. Are we doing code updates? Or what's in our code and what can we do through agreements and other things? But it's really trying to get an understanding of how do we want to approach these projects, because they're not more like greenfield developments that you get in other areas. It's just, the answers aren't that easy.
Yeah, usually there's some infrastructure there. It's just old, and in many cases it doesn't have sidewalks at all, or what they do have is inadequate. I don't think this is going to be something like this will be a big, anything that leads to buildings coming out of the ground so much, because you're constructing stuff anyway. I think it's really the reuse of existing buildings that seem to be triggering these things, and they just don't have the budget to really invest in the ground.
Well, I think about also if you have kind of one of those mid-block 50, 60 foot wide lots and they're going to completely redevelop, do we want them to build their frontage? Right. And if we do, what are we building? What are we going to build it to? And then how do you transition back to existing infrastructure?
We saw one of those on Second Street too, where there's a sidewalk to nowhere. I mean, there's no sidewalk on either
Yeah.
side, and
Yeah, on a personal level, I'm the developer for Second and Hawthorne we were talking about, and if I do those sidewalks, which is okay, but if we have no standard of what it's going to look like, so I build a sidewalk, and now in 5 years from now, my sidewalk looks out of tune with everyone else's, and it kind of looks like a shame. And then I think on top of that, the irony, with say Second Street being on the CIP, I could see maybe not in this point in time, but developers saying, well, I'm just going to build right into that CIP. If they're going to make me pay even $200,000-300,000 to do those sidewalks, I'll just wait because I can, and this process takes a while. And so I do think it could have a negative effect on potential development in that way. If we don't come up with it's all saying we should probably deal with this topic.
In my idealistic mind, I think that the issue isn't so much that $50,000 or whatever is gonna stop the development project. The issue is, what is that really doing for the connectivity of the pedestrian experience and of making it a walkable district? Is it actually serving, and could that be used better elsewhere? And right now it's like, well, this is the standard, but what if we took the time and spent the energy to say, hey, let's look at First Street. 70% of the sidewalks are completed on the east side of First Street, 30% are completed on the west side of First Street. We're going to pay little fees, and we're going to work on completing sidewalks on First on the east side of First before we put them on the west side, because that just makes more sense for a more connected pedestrian experience. And so in order to do that, you'd have to do the preliminary work to identify existing conditions and what actually works for a walkable city and how you actually get around, rather than going lot by lot. You have to look at it as a connected grid. And if we could start putting monies from these projects towards completing the grid rather than just completing that one lot, I think you more quickly get to a walkable town.
And I think that was our intention with actually putting Second Street on CIP, is to create connectivity. That felt
Yeah,
like
pick
it
a
connected
project, we'll get it
rather
done.
than
Right.
hodgepodge and we're doing here, but I think what we're all saying though is that first one, we all agree that should be a priority.
There's a lot
Yeah.
of things and discussions that need to be had that we're not going to solve here, but I was just letting you know from a staff perspective, we view that as like the next kind of big rock in this area, the big puzzle to figure out.
So I think we can still categorize it more broadly as looking at ways to remove barriers to development, and that being one of kind of the action items for that. The next one that I sort of identified is stuff that I've actually heard from the development community. So we have had a couple projects that come in that, the code is really great for new construction, mixed use housing projects, but it's a little bit harder to work with if you're buying an existing building and trying to renovate it or doing more of a adaptive reuse are kind of projects that we would consider more early activation in the district that aren't necessarily, complete redevelopment of a site. So that would be another one that I kind of wanted to open up for discussion of if you thought that that should be kind of part of that, evaluating barriers to development.
I can just say from the business association perspective, that has a lot of support, a lot. I was hooping and hollering. Catherine, Austin.
Yeah, I've done adaptive reuse, and I couldn't actually use the historic building code because the buildings weren't quite old enough. It's in another city. But there are a lot of issues that come up, and I do think that in the early phase of the development in this area, we are going to see a lot of adaptive reuse. And so if we can identify if there's specific problems for that. Now, it may be under the same category of removing barriers, but I do see it as the interim. Ultimately, we want to see a lot of new development there, but I think in the interim, we're going to see a lot of adaptive reuse. And so I think it is important to pay attention to it.
Anyone else?
I think it's super important, and I totally agree with what you guys are saying. The existing structures don't play well with new building codes, and new building codes are designed for the lifespan of a 100-year building, for all the environmental loading that we can throw on it. And we're looking at structures that were thrown up in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s that may be used for the next decade before being repurposed into, and so having more flexibility in the minimum design standards for energy code, structural code, basically the entire building code would help. I know that's a really hard thing to do, but ultimately it comes down to building official interpretation, and perhaps it's just helping to clarify the intent of like, this is what we need to get done in this area, and we need to advocate for more flexibility. But we've seen that be project killing. The minimum design standards are written as mandatory language, and it's really well intended, but it does not always work well when you're dealing with existing conditions, and that can be super onerous. Someone's just trying to do a simple TI. So I think it's a big deal, and I know it's a really hard thing to answer.
Yeah, we built the code beautifully for the long term.
Well,
Just needs a comma for adaptive reuse.
There's two, there's the development code and there's the building code, and those are definitely two different. When you're talking infrastructure, we have much more control over that. When you're talking like what John's talking to around building code, we're dealing with the state, the building official interpretation of those codes. We don't have local control over that, but it's how we interpret them. But yeah, we've been involved in a lot of projects like structural, they're not even aware of a structural upgrade or something that needs to happen for seismic, and then it's like game over at that point for what they want to do. Just want to make sure you understand that's kind of two different conversations of discussion.
Yeah, and I don't know how to attack it, but I'd love to try.
There's probably a state committee we could get you on.
Yeah. You can-
Any other thoughts on the adaptive reuse and early activation, whether there's support for kind of including that in an overall overcoming barriers to development goal?
I support it. It's kind of the idea of hitting lots of singles rather than going for the home run. You got to get something started, and those kind of little adaptive reuse sometimes become the really attractive little businesses that then make people want to live in an area. So I think whatever we can do to get those rolling would be fantastic.
Yeah, to steal a phrase from Corey, to make an amenity-rich area. These have the possibility, which then you have amenity-rich area, which allows for people to build awesome mixed-use housing, or just housing in general with mixed use on the bottom. It's obviously really important. And we have some barriers in this area, like the bell drop, which hopefully we'll talk about, that make it feel as though it's not an amenity-rich area in those ways. And so any way we can support that, I think, is important.
Yep, I would say that early activation is what pops to me, right? So, okay, it's adaptive reuse, but if thinking about like early activation, are we doing what we can to make sure that that's what's happening? Then we should be talking about it in our 2-year plan.
Okay. Jeff, Elisa, head nodding.
I
Head
agree.
nodding.
Yeah,
I just think just keeping the existing infrastructure, or not the infrastructure, but just the properties, like, it's just a barrier for access. It's cheaper, right? And so for me, that's always a priority, rather than just tear something down and build up. That's enhanced costs. So the more that we can keep the, like, kind of almost the culture of some of these properties. I know some of them weren't the greatest looking, but the more we can keep that, the more it feels like we're keeping Bend and also access to affordability.
I mean, that actually speaks to equitability too. The idea that there's
100%.
more access, and you have to have a lot behind you to be able to build a large building. You don't have to have as much to buy a rundown place that no one wants, and you kind of adapt and reuse. So I think that's actually really important. thought
We just
process.
want to make sure that when we make those type of decisions, it's done in full clarity of, if we're not requiring something to be built now, it's going to have to be built at some point.
Right.
And who's going to do that, and where's that money coming from? And so that's when we get involved in the conversations, like, we're looking at 20, 30, 40 years going, when can we actually require someone to build something if we want to or need to? And if we don't, then how do we fill that gap? Because you may not get another opportunity from a private sector. It may have to be public dollars or TIF dollars that need to be put in there.
True.
Kathy had
Kathy?
her hand raised.
Kathy?
Yeah, I was going to say it's a matter of equity also. I agree with that. And then also just from a sustainability aspect, it's so much superior to use and reuse what you already have rather than tearing that down and putting it into the waste stream. So, I think all this discussion is very valuable. And then I did want to say, Russ, I thought my interpretation of the building code was the chief building official had the final say. It didn't have to go to state. So just saying. I may be wrong on that, but that's usually how it's written in the introduction of every building code. So
That is
Okay.
true. State building, or our local building official is in constant discussions with the state in terms of interpretation and how they want to do it. And we've got a really good building official. Like, we got some great examples of how we've kind of really thought out of the box and got to compliance over time, and not, we don't need everything day one, but what, can we do upgrades as we go along? But he still has to kind of be within the confines of the building code.
yeah, no, I get it. And I think your point is well taken about if we don't get it initially, there needs to be some sort of agreement that maybe we can look at that within this category of, if somebody is getting an exemption to something that should X happen, then that triggers the need for, the improvements that are required if it's not already done by the TIF. So I think that was a good point of yours, Russ.
I think that early partnership programs where if you're doing adaptive reuse, contributing to, because getting to those creative solutions just takes a lot of energy and navigating. By the time you get it to a head building official and figure out what is a path, that's a lot of energy that, talking to the business district people isn't necessarily clear up front. And maybe that's a way we can help remove barriers is by having that partnership program where you contribute monies towards that design and those solutions. Because it's a heavy lift for a small TI to come up with a path that's going to be acceptable by state interpretation, approved by the head building official. And, everyone's nodding that, okay, we can do this, even though it's an exception to what the minimum design standards are. It's the first response is always design standards say this, so therefore that. So I feel like maybe that early partnership program will help on these lines.
No, I'll just so you kind of give context of what we're trying to do here is really what we look for as staff is that high level guidance from council when it comes through goals. And so if we get a direction from council that says, yes, in the core area, we want to get creative and we want to see these type of incentives, that gives staff the direction for me to work with Ally and our building official and our engineering group to say, all right, we need to figure out flexibility here. We just don't like to drive that on our own without having some type of policy guidance above us. And so that's really what this is all about, is trying to make sure that, because we've got a lot of different things we got to cover. So if we're going to spend time, where is the most important place for our staff to spend time to help support policy and goal objectives of the city?
I think that's a really important part is just it gives staff the ability to have a lot more latitude to
Yeah.
work on those projects. So the details flesh themselves out.
Yeah, because when we get direction of like housing's really critical in the core areas, critical, that tells me, okay, then we need to get really creative and have additional discussions that maybe we wouldn't have on other projects in other areas, because we want to get more housing on the ground and we want to see this area develop. So that allows us to direct staff to say, be creative.
Yeah.
Right, kind of, it's okay to push a little bit and see what we can come up with.
So just to kind of keep this conversation going, the other, of course, the screen goes away. The other kind of project idea that I've heard come up a couple times through discussion is this idea of kind of a concept plan for the core area or the Bend Central District. And I think, there's people on either side of whether we think that's a valuable use of time. And so I do think that there's other kind of planned efforts that could support some of that concept planning need, that if I'm understanding kind of from you what I think that could help fill a gap for. So our long range planning group will have to look at climate friendly area implementation if the CFEC rules continue to stay in effect, where they are looking at what would be our climate friendly areas. As part of that, we are looking at car-free streets. And so I think there will be opportunity to kind of partner with that long range planning group to look at some more detailed planning for the core area as part of that effort. If the city continues to move forward with looking at a city hall in the site, we will be doing some concept planning for a city hall site in this area and involving the community in that process. So I think that those are potential avenues. If we were to do some concept planning, the area that I see the most benefit is really looking at kind of some of these infrastructure requirements, the early activation requirements, and then street standards. So, but I kind of wanted to open it. I know we've had this conversation a couple times, but I don't know if I fully understand what everyone would want to accomplish with a concept plan. Because typically the only kind of teeth of a concept plan does lead to code changes, and we have done a lot of code work already in this area. So I'll kind of open it up for a discussion on that element. And then kind of the next question is just, is there anything else that you'd like to see as a priority that I didn't identify?
That's always my biggest thought, is that spending a bunch of money or any sort of money on a concept plan, if it doesn't have teeth, to what end? And so that's always my thought process on this. I know Kathy had her hand raised, and it looks like Dale after that. So
Yeah, and the other important thing we're reserving funds for consulting dollars for that concept planning. That's kind of almost like a direct impact to what you can get out the door with the business assistance programs in the early years. So just kind of thinking about those as if you're spending $50K on concept planning, that's $50K you're not getting out to a business in the business improvement program. So
and for us as staff, let's make sure we really understand what we're trying to achieve with
Yeah.
that, right? What the goal is.
Kathy?
Yeah, I would say that, Allison, if it was more in terms of policies, the policies that we're developing as a concept plan, I could be supportive. If it's pretty pictures of what if there was a plaza here and a high rise there, I would not be supportive of that at all. I think that we need to let some organic stuff happen in that core. And, sometimes these concept plans, they cost a lot of money, like you're saying, from a consultancy, and they don't really wind up doing anything or being implemented in any way. I think your idea of looking at if the city hall is going over there, of it kind of wrapping in some of that, but more sort of the policies that we're developing in terms of saying, helping with adaptive reuse and blah, 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 blah. That makes sense as a plan, but I would not be supportive of having a lot of consultancy to develop pretty pictures of what it could be. I don't think that's necessarily very positive use of our funds.
Bill, and then
I echo what Kathy said. We have those, and we have a lot of pretty concept drawings, but what I think would be useful or could be useful is kind of getting to John's point, was what are the streets going to be? So when we ask somebody to build an improvement, we've gotten not probably more than concept, but kind of more specific planning on what do we want those sidewalks to look like? How wide are they going to be? Are there park strips? Are they, that kind of stuff, so that if somebody is building one, we know what we want them to build. I think the other concepts that would be useful would be the public investments that are going to happen down here. So if the park district has a piece of property identified where they want to put a park, or the city decides where they want to put a city hall, I think those are going to be really catalysts for what kind of development goes on around them. And those would be really useful things for private development to know what kind of investment to make and what the timing is. kind of dictating what somebody can do with their property, more specific than the zoning that allows that range of stuff, I think would be counterproductive.
Yeah, and I'll just add, just from staff's perspective, we really want to see, is there going to be a new city hall and where is it going to be? Because that's going to be a giant anchor for a whole bunch of things. And when and if we do that, we will start, just the city hall process will start to ask some of these bigger questions of, are we doing a plaza? What's the future plans around us? Which I think you need to answer that question first before you then go figure out, do we need to redo the pretty pictures and do additional concepts? Because there's just a couple, we're looking at different things right now. And so there's no firm answer yet, but we would recommend let that play out.
Mhm. Well, some of the early drawings that you're talking about, and then the city hall is going there, kind of do the master planning for you, like you're kind
Exactly,
of saying.
yeah.
And so if those are the lead philosophically or just in time wise, that's going to cascade downward into a master plan of people are going to want to build to that kind of standard. So those are the leaders and that's what we want to do. And that's the use of the land. You don't want to build a 1-story building when there's a 5-story building sitting next to you potentially. So
But wouldn't you want to know if First Street was going to be carb free or Second Street was going to be carb free? Or, and wouldn't you want to know if, once we're all choked out and there's no space for any cars because we're a huge city, where all the buses are going? And I mean, shouldn't that stuff all be overlaid in a way that works with our core area plan? So I think most of that work's been done in the TSP and surrounding docks, but I think that I don't think city standard necessarily gets you all the way there. I think there could be some work that would be helpful. And not necessarily like spending lots of money on renderings, but just the straight line work of like, okay, this is how we think the long term is going to look, and that might change how you develop those streets.
Cross sections.
Because we have street standards for the core. I guess I want to make sure I'm understanding. Is there interest in really going back and re-examining those street standards to another level?
If there's not gonna be cars on them.
Well, but I'm just saying, we kind of have in the plans that are drawn up now in the codes, we do have street sections for the core area that are
On the
established.
local streets.
And is there either we want to identify every street and every cross section, or no, we want to go back and revisit what we're proposing as those cross sections for those streets?
Which streets do we have?
Well, hold on. Did you still have a comment, Lisa, before we?
Kind of feeding into that, it was exactly what Dale was saying, and kind of the same there was that, like, for the concern on sidewalks or, whatever's going to be in front, like if there was that kind of plan that I think you're talking about where, okay, there's 100 feet in front of this building, every 10 feet, there has to be this lamp that's there and the sidewalk is going to be looking like this. So then your concern of when the new sidewalk comes in and it looks different, they might be a few years off or something like that. But if the investors are investing in something that will stay and everything else fits in, I think that's kind of like when I was throwing around the word master plan of like, what's everything going to look like? And what you're saying about like, is there bikes? Is there parking on this side? That's what I'd be interested in. So then everyone knows, the developers know, oh, I need to put sidewalks in with the lights every bit but is that a possibility? Is that even?
It is, when we hear the term concept plan, we usually elevate up to, okay, we're going to put the park over here and parking over here. It's the bubble diagrams. It's more planning. That's why we just want to make sure that we're kind of understanding, are we talking about infrastructure and how infrastructure is going to be built in the area? Or are we talking about, how big of a park? Where is it? And
Sounds like both. I think we're talking about both, but yeah.
Well, it feels to me, it's like, part of what the discussion is of like, what do we think you, city council, your priorities should be coming up? The priorities that I see for city council should be get to a clear decision about where city hall is going as fast as you can, right? Making sure that's a good process and all that, but like, be clear and give direction so that we know where that is going to be and that we can kick off the various things that will kind of kick off in the district. And I think it would also be smart to sort of talk to parks, right? And be like, what are the options? Like, what are you guys thinking about for a park, right? Because it's like, there's these big chunks of the puzzle that like haven't come to the fore yet. We just generally know. But I would say from like a policy perspective, hey, you city council and work with your partners, Ben Parks and Rec, right? Like, where's City Hall going to go and where is this park, right? Because you have ideas, right? Like you've got some concepts, right? Of something maybe more urban, we talked about that linear park on Hawthorne, maybe not checking the box, but I mean, like, that would, if we're sort of setting a direction, I guess I would encourage us to kind of like
You're here.
put forth some things to them of like getting clarity on these key pieces of the puzzle helps the whole thing gel. And I just had a comment on Allison's like comment of like, hey, there's these things that are already moving, right? CFA designation, if CFEC sticks, is happening. And that's a place where, you know, it's on that sounding board bullet, right? That it's stuff that we'll just continually be doing. But I feel like the concept planning piece, especially right now, because it pulls from funds that we really need for our development partnership program, and that isn't as robustly funded as I think all of us would like to see. I'm reluctant to kind of pull from that. And so I think making use of these other pieces that are moving already and have funding and are going to be kind of ships that are sailing forth, you know, plugging into those and using those to help us figure out, like, can we get some more detail about like what the concept is here, right? And like what some of these things are going to look like, I think makes a lot of sense. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Rachel from the Park District did have her hand raised.
Okay.
Rachel from Park District.
Thanks, Sally. Yeah, sorry. And I apologize if I missed anything. I had to switch earbuds because mine died. So kind of following off onto that, you know, I've been talking to Allison because we've been doing some preliminary analysis for the performance measures with regards to what kind of service levels we have in the core area, right? And back when we did our comp plan back in 2018, there was not really much housing contemplated for the core area. So of course, we don't have park search areas within the core area, although I think everybody's pretty familiar with the fact that we've got some money identified for park within the core area. And what we found is that the current parks really poorly serve the core area. And Allison's graciously offered to let us come at some point in the new year to kind of show you all what we're starting to see. And so I think that's where we started thinking about the importance of some sort of long range planning, you know, whether it's in partnership with climate friendly rules or whatever it may be, to start thinking about where we should have these park search areas. And it's something that we're looking at as well as we think about updating our comp plan. So there's definitely some opportunities for partnership in this, and we'd love to have more conversations collectively. Because ultimately, I think our goal is just to make sure, whether it's privately owned or publicly owned space, we want to make sure that there's enough open space for all the new residents within the core area. I think, you know, looking at the performance measures, I don't remember off the top of my head, but I mean, there's potentially thousands of units, which is super exciting, right? And if we look at whether it's, you know, I don't know what the multiplier is right now. It looks like it's, you know, might be shifting with the new census data, but at least 2.4 people per unit, right? And so, you know, that's a significant amount of people there. And so I think what we're thinking about is just making sure that there's enough foresight in our planning and our thinking here that, you know, we don't get to the point where it's so wildly successful and built out that there's no longer a space for, you know, open space for people to have some respite, especially when we're going to have a lot of multifamily development here that is not going to have the traditional, you know, yards for people to enjoy. So that's been kind of our interest in some sort of master planning, concept planning. And as I mentioned, I think the district, with our efforts to update our comp plan next year, will certainly have some money at the table as well to think about those planning efforts in partnership with the city and other partners. So we're excited for that opportunity, and that was our interest in some more concept master planning.
Thank you.
And I'll just add, kind of building off of what Corey, because Corey, I thought you said that in a very eloquent way of, I think what we, as soon as that, if and when the flag is planted on where the new city hall is, and we understand the scale and scope of that project, there might be conversations, depending on where it's at, of coming back to Burr. It's like, what else do we need to think about now? And does Burr, do we want to use Burr funds to answer some of those questions, or are they completely related to the city hall? And are they going to answer the question? So I think that's why we're saying we need a little bit more time to let that gel. But I think the way, like, that's an important thing for the entire area. Are we doing it or are we not? And if so, where?
Yeah.
And then, because we're speculating now, right? But that is it's the major first move for the district.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like then we've got full support on infrastructure requirements of that first dollar point. And then the second one, adaptive reuse, where you seem to be mixed on the concept planning. I'm heavily supportive of those 2 points that Corey made, of getting direction on these larger ideas of both the park and City Hall. I also say, from like purely an equitability perspective, again, to just beat that horse, speculation, a lot of developers are speculating on where these things are going. And the longer the city takes, you know, people in this room and other people who are watching this have an idea of where things are going. Maybe people who don't follow or don't have the time to follow aren't. And so the quicker the city comes out with that information, it can disperse through the community better, and more people maybe don't have access in the same way can make better financial decisions too. So I just think that's an important thing just to say out loud.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
mean, just by Borough and council and sorry, CAB and Borough, because council's Borough, signaling where investment's going to go, that changes the conversation on a bunch of projects,
Yeah.
right? That may have just been idling for a little bit. It's like, oh, okay, we have a little bit more clarity now. So are we going to dust off that pro forma and do another run at the numbers now that we know?
Is there anything else that anyone would like to add to? And
Just a question. I think we've talked a lot about some good goals. How do we want to deliver this, Ally? Can we write a letter to council for their goal setting session, since that's going to occur before next meeting?
Yeah, so the way that the goal setting works is there's actually a form that all advisory board members fill out. So I've already sent the form to Corey and Kurt to kind of look at, but we established kind of what are CAB's 3 top priorities? What are you working on that could help achieve those priorities? What do you want to see council sort of prioritize in their goals to support the work? I don't know the exact questions off the top of
Yeah.
my head, but we fill out a form
Really?
and then we can also send one of you to participate in that listening session. So I am kind of looking for a volunteer to attend that January 19th.
And you'd have a
morning.
couple minutes. Because it
listening session.
involves kind of all the standing committees, nonprofits, we just want to, council's trying to gather information, like what's important to the community. So when we do goals and budget, we're making sure that we're in alignment.
And if I can go, I'm already going to be probably going in as the business association person for this. So I don't think I'd be the best person for that. Just to put that out there. And then I also might have be in the hospital with a birth. So
Oh.
yeah, there's other things going on.
Again, back to priorities.
I would like to participate in that. I think that'd be fun. And I might be there for my neighborhood association anyway.
Is everyone okay with John representing CAB?
If I understand correctly, we would collectively we'd have a side session working on the verbiage in that form that you're going to distribute.
I'm kind of taking the notes from this and we'll kind of weave it down. I don't have like a meeting scheduled for all of us to review it. So I'd probably be working with a subset of you, like a non-quorum, to develop that. So,
Like Russ is
I would
saying,
just
it's going to
run
be
it by
like,
you guys.
these are our 3 priorities the city council is going to.
but I would send you all the
Yeah.
talking
Yeah,
points.
Council's open to written letters, to in-person, couple-minute discussion in front of council, to both. So you have options on how you want to deliver the information. But
And just to be clear, right, like we've said that looking at the slide, right, there's the existing work plan, right? And those continue to be things that we're focused on and remain priorities. And this like second chunk of discussion has been, what are the new priorities we want council to consider? So yeah, so long as we're not like swapping things out from the bottom list for the top list, because I do think all the things on that top list need to stick. And we need to see those through. So just a comment there
Yeah,
to be
I'm-
extra clear on that.
I'm expecting, the development partnership program will remain a goal, but
Yeah.
anyway, I'll give an update on that in a second.
Is there anything else that we want to add to this list though?
I did want to kind of weave in, like, I did hear a theme with the concept planning of just wanting to identify, like, what are the streets going to be? And I think that we could weave that into the infrastructure requirements work. So that could be, we could kind of include that as part of that
I saw you had them pulled up. It's just for certain street segments. isn't
It's
it?
for like Second Street, Fourth Street, and any local street in the BCD has, basically it's 10-foot wide sidewalks with street tree requirements, and then curb extensions, and then where there's enough room on street parking.
So Greenwood and Franklin will get actually designed in next year.
Yeah, and then we don't have a concept for Hawthorne yet. And then Olney is a bond project, so Olney is, we already have an RFP out for a design for improving sections of Olney with the bond list, so I'm not expecting us to do other major improvements to Olney in the BCD.
Just real quick, Second Street, I thought I heard there's potential for it to be a walk street, like a closed. Is that?
That's potential, but
Yeah.
later on discussion based on CFAC rules and other things.
right now it'll be designed as a full vehicular ped bike street. The question is just how, do we want buffer bike lanes, do we want parking, do you want accessible parking, those type of things? And what do you want that streetscape to look like?
Something I hear from the business association a lot, and Kathy, I see your hand up too. And I think we heard a lot when Corey was doing the outreach for the business assistants was the mismatch of uses and some of the uses, but particularly the use of the bottle drop. And so I want to bring it up to this board and how it could be a discouraging factor of building the thing that we all want to see in this area, which is housing and mixed use development, and worth something that we might want to put on there or worth exploring. So I hear that. I wouldn't even say daily, I'd say 5-6 times a day when I'm going my rounds in the BCD. And
What type of path to giving input exists, and what role does the city of Bend play in the location of the bottle drop?
Depends what they want to do and where they want to go. I mean, we can have a lot of discussions with them, and there are always potential opportunities or options, but we need to know what their business model is, and they need to make the initial move that they want to relocate and where they want to go.
They own that site and have contracts with grocery stores to operate from that site, because they collect a certain amount of cans based on their locational requirements with grocery stores. So if a grocery store is located within 3.1 miles of a bottle drop, they have a contract with the bottle drop that the bottle drop will be a facility that collects cans instead of the grocery store. And then they also have another mileage buffer. I can't remember if it's 6 miles, that they have a different contract with grocery stores. So they currently own that site, and they have existing contracts they are set to expire, I think, within the next 1 to 2 years.
And so there's an opportunity potentially if we were to engage with the bottle drop and speak to them about this misuse of uses and the idea that it is our vision to make this area vibrant, second downtown. This use doesn't correlate. We're not pushing you out. What we're saying is we're going to work with you. We're going to try to identify and help because this is such a focused area for our city. I think that there's value in there. You can tell that I do. And I think there's an option. So in 1.5 to 2 years, if the bottle drop re-ups on their contracts with the established grocery stores, then we're looking at a 5, 6, 7 year use of the bottle drop in the center of the Bend Central District and the core area in general. So it seems like there's this potential opportunity time that we might want to take advantage of.
I think the city can be involved. I mean, we can bring in, police and our planning group. We just don't have direct control over that. But I think council will be very interested if they are thinking of options of kind of what are they thinking and how can we help?
Mhm.
It's a private development issue.
It is completely a private development issue, but we have, like, you have concerns. It's on our radar too for a variety of reasons that everyone is aware of. So.
Yeah, and I think I'd probably frame it more as, is this something that the city can provide more leadership on, of saying, hey, can you be a little more proactive in engaging the current owner to talk about what viable scenarios there are? One of those scenarios is them remaining there, probably, right? Like,
Right.
and then are there others that have traction and are viable, right? So it's sort of going into it with an open, kind of like open mind about, like, there is a scenario where it remains, and then are there other ones that we can explore together, but the city taking on a little bit more of a leadership role. So rather than saying, well, when they're ready, they come to us, but more that the city would say, okay, well, this is so important and this is in such a vital district, we need to start having some more conversations, right? And kind of stepping in and leading on some of those conversations. I think it's more how I would frame how that conversation could look, of a direction to them to consider for priorities for the district.
And we're having those conversations in context of other issues that are going on in
Yeah.
the district. Yeah, but it's how much does council want to be involved and
Right,
staff be
like,
involved? I mean, do you want to,
Yeah.
if they want to move, how much do we?
Right, or if they want to stay.
Where do they
right?
wanna
Like,
go,
if they
right?
want to stay, then what does it look like, right? That if that is going to be a continued use, how do we make sure that that is better integrated, that it is as safe as it can be, that we're thinking about, like, if the goal is to bring people to this place and improve the image of this place, then understanding if that is the scenario that's sticking, how are we going to plan for that? How are we going to make sure that's the best fit it can be for all the community members that impacts? So I think that would be a good kind of productive dialogue.
Did you guys ever
to be
see
having.
James Teeter's landscape drawings of how he proposed to improve that lot?
Mm-mm.
It's super creative and pretty cost effective, but we did, we were kind of doing some early visioning on what this might look like. It was obvious that we could beautify this in some ways, and we talked to the owner. And they were like, and it was like, this would only cost $20,000 and this would look great. And I wonder if we could help create a project that just changes how it looks in the near term. That might be more cohesive with what we're trying to get done, and perhaps CAB supports with TIF monies for a development partnership program that improves the current location. Just be a concept idea. I don't know.
It's my understanding from speaking with, he's not the owner. Do you know what his?
Eric
Eric
Chambers.
Chambers is a
He's,
director.
yeah, I
some
don't know
sort,
his
yeah.
exact title.
think it's public
That they
relations,
are,
right?
yeah, they're open to moving. And when they have tried, the landlords, don't want them
Mhm.
there, or the entire shopping center wouldn't allow for it or something. So I think what you're saying, Corey, it would be helpful if the city could help with that. And I don't want to say like encourage places that don't want them, but they're not like, no, we're staying here and I'm not moving. They are very open to moving, and I believe they'd be open to two kind of like north and south locations to expand their reach for the guidelines that they have to fall into. So I agree that moving is a possibility, and they just need help no one's here locally scouting locations for them. And so they just need help finding those spots and securing a lease or land ownership.
And I can propose something too, because I believe we're in positive conversations with Bottle Drop. It's just trying to figure out what the right answer to the riddle is. It's kind of what you were saying of like, here, the biggest questions we're getting about development in this area was where's City Hall and what are we doing with Bottle Drop?
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
and you can kind of frame those in the same
Yeah.
Yes.
topic of, those are not the hindrances, but those are like, you got infrastructure, City Hall, and Bottle Drop. Those are, to get someone to build a building, those are probably the first three questions they're asking.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of putting those in together into one bucket of,
Yeah.
if
Absolutely.
That's well said, Russ.
We're all on
Yeah.
the same page.
I'm hearing you correctly. I'm not-
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I hear the same things I know you have when you did the small group, so.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and I can't remember. I think Kathy had her hand up for what, did we already go to her?
Cool. I said I remembered and then I didn't, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. It didn't really fit in with the discussion of the bottle drop, so I just kind of put my hand back down. It sounded like with the climate friendly areas that they were looking to include some streets that did not allow cars. And rather than it being a large, first or second street, I was wondering, well, has there been any work on a cross section of what that would be? And also, could it be more of some of the smaller east-west blocks? And it would create not so much a pedestrian network, but more of a gathering area where, restaurants could have outdoor eating and so forth. I mean, like an outdoor mall. So I'm just curious what's happening on that, considering that's probably coming down the pike. I was just wondering if any work's been done or any thought about that, and if it could be something that we could weigh in on as it moves forward.
Yeah, I think Greeley would be a really great candidate. It's like a completely undeveloped roadway today in between Hawthorne and Franklin. We haven't sort of identified where should the no car street be. I think Hawthorne is obviously another great candidate to consider that if we're building a pedestrian and bicycle only bridge to connect Juniper Park to downtown. That would be another great candidate, but there's no firm decision on where is the car-free street in the district. That would take more work.
And CFAC doesn't give you great clarity. It doesn't say you have to have pedestrian only streets, but it has a lot of kind of objectives and VMT reductions, that those are tools in the toolbox to achieve that. So just so you know, Kathy, no, we have not. I mean, besides just having what Ally just said, it's like, hey, if we're thinking about it, this would be one to consider, but nothing official or study analysis or studies or anything have been done on that.
Okay, well, that's good. Thank you for that. And I was just saying that our group might be a good group to weigh in on it as it moves forward, because it will have an impact, obviously. So just keep us in mind, that's all.
Sounds like we're gonna fill out that paperwork and then John's gonna come in our steed.
Yeah, and I can have another person help review that paperwork. We can have up to 4 of you. So Kurt, Corey, John, if anyone else wants to kind of review the council goal sheet deal. So what I kind of want to wrap this up. So what I'm kind of hearing is 2 overarching themes. One is evaluate barriers to development, where I really see kind of looking at some of the code and like street standard requirements and ways to kind of be a little bit more flexible and look at how to really get projects off the ground. And then the second kind of overarching goal would be really just clear direction and leadership from city council on some key initiatives for the core area. So that would include, clear direction on city hall, providing more leadership around the bottle drop. And then kind of as we evaluate CFAs or even without CFAs, kind of looking at where no car streets could be in this area and kind of doing a little bit more kind of identifying clear goals for the area. Does that sound
Parks included with the larger.
Yeah, that's-
scope thing.
parks?
And then we do have a guest that I do want to give time at the end of the meeting because we have some public comment, which is great. And so we're running a little bit behind, but I thought that was a really important discussion to have, and that was the meat of it. So if you feel okay with it, if we could move to performance metrics, if everyone's okay with it.
Yeah, and what I might recommend actually is that I don't think we'll have enough time to really go through the full performance metrics. So I might just kind of give some highlights and ask you all to review the presentation and the memo that was sent out and send me any comments that you have before the next meeting. I know this is kind of always the agenda item that gets pushed to the wayside, but one day we'll like really focus on it and get them finalized. But we did, so some updates to the memo that you'll find, this is like, you can't even see the font. So maybe this is good. Couple of big updates to the memo is we did start to identify some performance targets for each of the performance metrics. So you'll see those in there and kind of where those performance targets came from. One kind of big update is we did kind of totally change the park performance metric so that we're really targeting for 100% of core area residents to be within a half-mile walk shed of a park by 2051. So that kind of totally changed. We did delete the walkscore.com metric, kind of coordinated on some of the performance targets with other agencies. One new metric that I wanted to kind of throw out that I think would be pretty easy to report on is just TIF spending by project plan category. So we have 5 project categories in our TIF plan, transportation, streetscape utility, affordable housing, the development assistance, and then open space plazas, facilities, amenities, and wayfinding, and then plan administration. So just reporting how we're allocating our TIF funds amongst those project categories. And then I think at our next meeting, we can kind of get a little bit more into the average median residential rental costs and the commercial lease rates. Essentially, I mean, the story is essentially there's no good way to do this and get reliable data. So there's a couple different strategies we can use, but I don't think any of them are great unless the city were to adopt a citywide rental reporting program for housing rentals, which is outside the scope of what you all do. And so we can kind of get a little bit more into that, but if you might want to like read the memo and look at kind of the different options in the presentation slide and just kind of send me any feedback, but it is really hard to get that data for just a subset geography of the city.
Could you go back?
Yeah.
If we could add just a point, because I'm looking through that really quick,
Mhm.
just work with property management groups.
Yeah. And that's kind of, so bullet
Rather
number,
than staff do Zillow, is what I'm trying to say.
okay. Yeah, because I did reach out to a consultant that does kind of some of this work before, and I was like, what's the deepest dive you've ever done on this? And they're like, well, in Tigard, we had an intern literally calling property owners, and you kind of have to set like a limit of, we'll call them 5 times. If we don't hear back, we move on. And even if you get a 10% response rate, that's more, data than you would have had, but that is literally what you're doing to get this data. It's not.
We have a lot of property management groups that just do that.
Mhm.
I mean, if we could quell like 5 or 10 of them, then we could get a lot more data. is my thought process.
Right, with Zillow and CoStar,
If they'd have it, not have to go down.
right, yeah.
So,
There's also a fairly limited number of commercial real estate firms that do leases and they do them all over town. And you know, they probably can't tell you specifically this space pays this rent, but I think they could give you averages.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the concern, right? Is if it's easier to get the aggregate data, or people feel more comfortable sharing aggregate data versus anytime somebody shares something with city staff, it becomes public record. So there's just, I think there would be reservation in sharing a lot of like detailed data. So I'll explore, this is good feedback. I'll explore kind of talking to some property management companies and even, Compass and commercial
That's the-
brokers
yeah.
to see if there's kind of another strategy that I didn't think about. Trying to think of, so, average assessed annual growth rate, kind of targeting something higher than 5%. We just kind of set our goal for the 30-year district to have a greater than 5% or 5% at least average annual assessed growth. I wasn't totally sure how, kind of setting a target for how much development activity we want to see increase annually. We don't have like I kind of want to see the data a couple years to set a more reasonable target. And so for right now, I'm just recommending that we want to see increased development activity, but I don't have specific targets quite yet.
Development activity.
Yeah. Well, and we have a lot of renovation and alterations happening in the core area. So you can kind of see, 24 renovation alteration permits, 3 additions, and then 4 new constructions. So I really think, some of our goals should be focused on new construction and particularly construction of housing. If we saw more of that, that would be, great to see in the district. So go ahead, kind of take a look at the presentation and the memo and just send me any comments or feedback you have by the next meeting, and we can spend more time on this at the next meeting.
And I've got like 3 quick comments on the
Yeah.
performance metric. Hopefully they're quick. So the walk score came out. Did we supplement back in like accounts, like actual walk bike counts, like at various crossings?
So we have that for the Franklin. We have like mode split for Franklin Avenue counters. I think our goal would be to add a counter on Greenwood.
Okay.
And potentially Hawthorne as we reconstruct those. We could even look at 2nd Street. But right now we have at least kind of counts for Franklin that are a permanent counter that's always collecting information. And so the way that I kind of set that up is right now the ped bike mode split is 2.7%. So the goal to increase that to 4% of total trips by 2030.
Great, thank you. And then my other question, is there any, I'm sure there's a good rationale here for, and when we're looking at the performance targets, like they have varying years, right? So this goes till the tip runs till 2051. So just curious, like in terms of, tracking and sort of ease of reporting and that kind of thing, any kind of explanation for why like some of these, it's 2028, 2040, 2051, like.
Yeah, so the housing and job targets come from our adopted housing needs analysis and our employment opportunities analysis that were used for the UGB planning. And then the 2040 numbers come from when we did updates to those for our transportation system plan. So that those are kind of adopted numbers that our long range planning group uses. As we amend and update our housing needs analysis and our EOA or employment opportunity analysis in the future, I expect those numbers to be updated and the years to increase, but I'm trying to be consistent with existing plans. I think we could set a goal for the mode split for 2030 and 2051 if we wanted. I think some of them, it's just hard to forecast that far out with what's an appropriate goal when I have no idea what 2051 is going to look like. I don't know if you do.
No, I mean, I think that makes sense. Thank you. And then my last question had to do with the metrics that you just pulled about sort of like development types. And what that made me think of is, do we want some kind of metric in here that is telling us like the success rate of our development partnership program? Like how many funded, what types of projects, like how many folks came through and improved their storefronts, like, you know what I mean? Like something that's a little more correlated to like the success of that actual program and sort of the benefit that it brings. And so maybe that's captured in here somewhere already, but that was my thought of seeing that metric of like some correlation with the development partnership program might be a powerful story to tell with some of those
Yeah,
numbers.
we do have the funding leverage with tax increment finance investments. So, if we were offering 40,000 as a grant to a project, how much more did they invest
Mhm.
on that site? And that we would kind of at least report on how much did we leverage from that project. But I think we could do kind of supplemental overviews of like how successful are our programs in addition to like as part of the annual report. One other, I guess, kind of while we're kind of going through this a little bit more than I thought we would, is the affordability, kind of setting a goal for how many affordable housing units. Our housing needs analysis identifies that about 50% of our households need to be offered at rental levels or sale levels that are affordable to people making 80% area median income or less. I think we all know that our existing housing stock is way less than 50% of our existing housing stock is serving folks making 80% area median or income or less. But I did set our affordable housing goals to be 50% of our housing need for this area. So I think it's an aggressive goal, but it's based on our housing needs analysis.
On that, what levers are we able to pull there? And how does that come into the planning of like the larger timber yard project and the
Yeah.
like if that's a goal, is that something that it's codified so that staff can move it into larger developments, or is that just?
I mean, I think what the tools that we have to encourage, we really only have incentive tools to encourage affordable housing, but we have our affordable housing program that offers, direct assistance to affordable housing projects. We can directly assist affordable housing developments with TIF. And then we also have the MUFTI program, which tries to encourage some affordable housing or middle income housing as part of the development. And then there was one more that I was just thinking about. Kathy could probably explain it, but I mean, those are the tools that we have other
There's no
bonus.
regulatory for that.
There's no, currently there's no regulatory arm. I
If
do
you
know
regulate
that,
it, it's probably gonna stifle it even more to be. honest with
Right,
you.
it's a delicate
That's what
thing,
it's
it's,
right now.
right, it's just interesting that
the,
that's our
and
goal.
to, I also wanted to note that we would incorporate, like, because this 50% is also talking about extremely low income. I would incorporate like shelter beds as contributing to the capacity for this. So we do have multiple shelters in the core area, and we've opened 2 more since the district was created. So that would also count towards this unit count. And then the timber yard site is looking at doing a 250 unit affordable housing project as part of that development. So that that would count as well. And then Kathy had her hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Ally. You covered most of it, but one of the discussions that we had was the idea, we had a presentation at AHAC on the difficulty of market rate, more affordable, middle income type housing development, and the impact that the increase in mortgage rates has had in terms of exacerbating the problem. And one of the suggestions was if the city could have a loan program to get through the entitlement process and then be repaid, so short-term loan. And I was mentioning that we already do a loan program in AHAC and at the city, so it's not inventing something new. And so I just wanted to bring it up. I don't know what the answer is, but just one other tool in the toolbox would be a short-term revolving loan program to help incentivize more affordable housing. So I don't know if that's possible from the TIF district, but I want to put it out there that we already know how to do this. It's not inventing something new, and that it could be done.
I'll talk to Lynn. My general gut reaction is if the affordable housing group already has established that, we could put TIF dollars to supporting that program for projects in the TIF area.
Yeah,
But-
so if you could connect with Lynn, I mean, it may not be specifically outlined, but just the process of dealing with loans is something that we do all the time. So, because I think some people were afraid, well, we don't do loans, so how could we possibly, no, we do loans. So if it's something that our district can coordinate with AHEP, I think that would be helpful in encouraging this type of housing.
Yeah, and I do know the Murphy Urban Renewal Area did do a loan to an affordable housing development. It was like a 30-year.
Yes, and that's what got us all those fantastic apartments down there. So it is something that we should keep in mind, is all I'm saying.
Okay, so then I just have one more quick update for the last agenda item, and then we can let John give public
I don't know
comment.
if you need 20 minutes or anything.
So just wanted to provide an update. We did have a subcommittee that met 3 times to talk about, gave really good feedback into what we would like to see from some development partnership programs. And we have a consultant on board to kind of help craft what those programs could look like. And so from the feedback that we got from that subcommittee, are kind of thinking about breaking this up into 3 different programs. One would be more of that new development assistance for larger projects, potentially focused a little bit more on supporting improvements to, supporting public improvements that they're making, with probably like higher criteria scoring for housing projects. And then the second one would be a storefront improvement program that would really be focused on street facing businesses that have a customer facing role. And then the third one would be more of a business tenant support program that's really focused more on stabilization of existing businesses or new minority, women, or veteran-owned businesses that really helps keep them in the district or help offset the costs if some of the improvements that they're making would significantly increase their rents. So that one's really focused more on stabilization, whereas the storefront improvements really on kind of the beautification of the district. It was hard to kind of mesh those into one because they had very different goals. And so we'll come January 19th to kind of present all 3 of those programs and what the criteria would look like for those programs to get your input. And then we would be kind of drafting the program policies. Hopefully those would be ready to bring back to you for your February 16th meeting. That's kind of the goal I have right now. And then if you all kind of like those programs, then we could schedule a check-in with BURA in March or April to have those programs adopted. So that's kind of the track that we're on for the development partnership programs. And by that February meeting, I think we'll have a lot more clarity on like how much funding we could actually seed these programs with. Any questions on that? Cool. You like the direction we're headed so far? I'm gonna take that as a yes. Okay.
I do, yeah. It hits all the buckets, I think that.
I read
we're
those
worried about
minutes.
it.
It looked like a productive
Yeah.
meeting.
And then just at our next meeting, we will be electing a new chair and vice chair per our bylaws. So maybe start thinking about if you're interested in being a chair or vice chair or who you would nominate.
Kurt's retiring.
I'm tired.
And
So, yeah.
Corey?
Great. Yeah, so the
you
next
are
meeting
too.
is January 19th. And we do have a public comment, which is really exciting. John, owner of Unofficial Log.
First.
Yeah, first. It might be loud.
You can come out to the table.
I usually watch you guys on YouTube at 1.5 speed, so this is a little bit different for me.
Less chipmunky.
Anyway, I was in the area watching you guys live on my phone, and I thought, why don't I just swing by? My name's John Halen. I run Unofficial Logging Company. It's right on the border of the core district. Even though we're on the other side of 97 from what I consider the core district, we are on the border. And yeah, I just really appreciate the work that you guys have been doing. It's been fun to watch you guys collaborate over the last, 2 years? Or a
Just
year and a
1
half,
year.
1 year,
1
1
year,
year. And I would say I'm really excited to see all the different crossings that, like the Hawthorne Bridge, possibly going forward. As chair of the accessibility committee, I definitely want you guys to always keep in mind people who are in wheelchairs or hand-powered cycles or people that want to bike everywhere or walk everywhere. So definitely keep that in mind. And thank you so much for your time.